eyes on Intel. Resist, don't hide.
Welcome to Eyes on Intel. Today is Tuesday, June 9th, 2026. When the corporate state begins to lose its psychological grip on the population, it drops the illusion of consensus and relies entirely on the architecture of force. To measure the true depth of the ruling class's panic, you don't look at the curated theater of their press briefings. You look at the biometric grids, the midnight flight manifests, and the physical thickness of their concrete walls. Before we dive into the raw machinery of the enforcement state today, a quick reminder. This analysis remains entirely independent, completely free of corporate sponsorship, and uncompromised by the very prison conglomerates and state surveillance cartels we expose every single week. If you value this work and want to keep this analysis uncompromised, please consider subscribing and donating to keep our operations running. We are entirely community-funded, and your solidarity is what keeps this beacon lit. Let us start with the macroeconomic architecture of the current containment state, specifically the unprecedented influx of capital that occurred under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This single piece of legislation funneled an astronomical $170 billion into federal enforcement logistics, with $45 billion carved out strictly to finance the detaining and caging of human beings. The material result of this capital injection was a hyper-accelerated infrastructure boom. Over the course of just 12 months, more than 100 new detention facilities were quietly brought online across the domestic landscape. By mid-January of this year, the daily immigration detention population hit an absolute historical ceiling, surpassing 73,400 individuals held on a single day. This is not a security apparatus. It is an optimized extraction system designed to turn state-sanctioned violence into guaranteed private corporate revenue, utilizing human bodies as the raw material for speculative finance. The deep financial contradictions of this state-sponsored grift are laid entirely bare in the recent Government Accountability Office audit of the Camp East Montana megafacility at Fort Bliss. Built to hold 5,000 people, this massive complex represents a $1.3 billion federal contract that was frantically rushed through to a private logistics firm with absolutely zero prior experience in managing detention infrastructure. Because the architects of this deal deliberately omitted occupancy flexibilities from the contract, the state has locked itself into a permanent payout structure. By early 2026, the facility held only about 1,600 people, yet the public is still footing the bill for the full 5,000 beds. Millions of dollars are bleeding directly from the public treasury into private corporate bank accounts every single week. All while the individuals trapped inside endure rampant safety standard violations, systemic medical neglect, and infrastructure failures. It is a stark reminder that under capital, the efficiency of the cage is measured entirely by its profit margin, not its utility. But the corporate architecture of the cage goes much deeper than just the mega facilities. If you ever want to see the true face of the nonprofit industrial complex, look at who gets paid to manage the black sites when the state decides to seize control of a child's body. Let us pull back the curtain on a town called San Benito, deep in the geographic margins of South Texas. Since last summer, a chilling and highly coordinated logistical shift has been taking place under the radar of the Federal Office of Refugee Resettlement. The administration issued a quiet, sweeping directive to funnel unaccompanied pregnant migrant girls, some as young as 13 years old, and many carrying high-risk pregnancies that are the direct result of rape into a single, isolated detention facility in San Benito. Why San Benito? Because under the absolute abortion ban in Texas, San Benito functions as a total reproductive healthcare desert. By geographically trapping these highly vulnerable children in a state where basic bodily autonomy has been criminalized, the federal enforcement apparatus is actively bypassing its own legal obligations, deliberately engineering a space where forced birth becomes an inescapable physical reality. When lawmakers and physicians recently managed to breach the doors of this facility, they found a manufactured ghost town. They witnessed 13-year-old girls holding infants in a facility utterly stripped of specialized medical equipment. There were no fetal Dopplers to check for basic distress in high-risk pregnancies, no lactation specialists, no diabetic diets for gestational complications, and absolutely no transparency regarding where the dozens of previously held girls had suddenly disappeared to. This is state-sponsored warehousing designed to weaponize geography against the bodies of the working-class global poor, And like every mechanism of state violence under capitalism, this trauma is highly lucrative, which brings us to the entity holding the contract. The facility in question is operated by Urban Strategies, a massive federal contractor that brilliantly masquerades under the rhetorical cover of faith-based community empowerment. To understand how minority and working-class communities are continually turned into turnkey profit zones, you have to trace the bloodlines of the capital. And all roads here lead directly to Lisa Trevino-Cummins, the founder and president of Urban Strategies. Her trajectory is the absolute textbook definition of the nonprofit industrial complex. Rooted deeply in the halls of financial power, she cut her teeth spending 12 years in the corporate banking sector at Bank of America. It was within the executive suites of Bank of America that she pioneered how massive financial institutions could co-opt faith-based organizations to sanitize their public image, shield corporate assets, and expand their market reach into underserved neighborhoods. This is exactly where the one dirty hand washes the other mentality of modern governance was perfected. Wall Street institutions provide the capital to fund selective, highly managed community projects, and in return, they receive massive tax write-offs and a glowing public relations shield to obscure their predatory extraction. From the executive banking floor at Bank of America, she was pulled directly into the Bush White House to help launch the Community and Faith-Based Initiative, essentially acting as a primary architect for the very federal pipeline that outsources the public safety net to private, unaccountable religious and corporate entities. Once you help design the vault, the next logical step in the capitalist grift is to step outside and start holding the bag. In 2003, she left the government and launched Urban Strategies, securing massive federal grants to manage the very poverty her policies helped engineer. The state does not care about the clinical failures of Urban Strategies because the state is not paying for health care. The state is paying for compliance, isolation, and the strict enforcement of biological and geographic control over working-class bodies. This violent infrastructure requires an equally brutal legal cover to operate inside our neighborhoods. We saw this manifest clearly through the warrantless entry directive issued by Attorney General Pam Bondi. This directive stripped away the basic constitutional illusion of residential sanctity, explicitly authorizing state and local forces to enter the homes of working-class families without a shred of judicial paperwork. It provides the absolute operational green light for aggressive, door-to-door residential sweeps. This is state terror engineered to fracture local communities, split neighborhood solidarity, and keep labor cheap, compliant, and terrified of organizing. By rendering an entire segment of the working class permanently vulnerable to home invasion, the state ensures that corporate employers retain absolute leverage over their workforce. When you look at the physical execution of these directives, the reality is blood-chilling. Take the legal fallout from Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago. Roughly 300 heavily armed federal agents descended upon a South Shore apartment building, shattering doors and dragging 18 residents straight out of their beds without ever producing a warrant. But the cruelty did not stop at physical removal. The entire operation was systematically filmed by a DHS-hired camera crew and tactical drones. Human trauma, broken doors, and weeping children were treated as raw production material, packaged into slick promotional content to justify the next billion-dollar enforcement budget. This is the state transforming its violence into an engineered spectacle for political consumption. To bypass the legal walls of sanctuary cities that refuse to participate in this class warfare, the federal apparatus has executed a quiet, sweeping bureaucratic takeover through the explosion of 287G agreements in late 2024. There were only 135 of these pacts nationwide. Within a year, that number skyrocketed to over 1,300 agreements spanning 40 states. By deputizing local sheriffs and municipal police officers to act as federal deportation agents, the state has effectively overwritten local democratic protections. They have transformed your local tax dollars and municipal police forces into direct extensions of a centralized corporate caging apparatus. And where local legal friction does slow the federal machine down, private capital simply routes around it, as seen in the swamp-bound black box known as Alligator Alcatraz in southern Florida. Opened last July as a soft-sided facility, this complex represents a highly dangerous mutation in detention infrastructure. It is the first major state-run immigration facility operating entirely outside standard ICE contracts, functioning as a lawless laboratory for human containment where basic human rights are treated as administrative inefficiencies. But let us turn our focus to the physical front lines of resistance, where the individuals trapped inside this machinery are weaponizing the only leverage they have left: their own bodies and their own labor. Right now, a massive labor and hunger strike is tearing through the East Coast's largest detention center, Delaney Hall in Newark, New Jersey. This facility is operated by the GEO Group, a multi-billion-dollar private entity holding a 15-year federal contract worth over $60 million annually. Yet they rely entirely on the detained population to perform the facility's daily maintenance, food service, snow removal, and sanitation. The detainees are forced to work for $1 a day or more frequently, for no pay at all. We are witnessing a massive 13th Amendment crisis playing out in real time. Over 300 individuals have completely halted their labor and refused meals. Through handwritten letters smuggled out of the facility, they are protesting unlivable conditions, including maggot-infested food riddled with worms, undrinkable metallic water, a persistent lack of medical care, and bathrooms in terrible, inhumane condition. This is not just a plea for better conditions. It is a targeted, material strike against the economic engine of the prison itself, by withholding their exploited labor. These workers are intentionally bleeding the profit margins of a massive corporate contractor, proving that even deep inside the cage, the working class holds the ultimate power to stop the gears of capital. The systemic cover-up of this crisis is staggering. The Department of Homeland Security and the current administration are completely denying that the hunger strike even exists. They release statements claiming they are giving the detainees all the calories they want, mockingly stating the facility is not a Holiday Inn. When New Jersey Governor Mickey Sherrill toured the facility just yesterday, the GEO Group explicitly barred her from speaking with any of the detainees inside. The facility hosts are enforcing a complete blackout, raising serious alarms about the true severity of the human rights abuses occurring just behind those walls. In response, the state of New Jersey has officially sued the GEO Group to force state health inspectors inside to investigate the rotting food and tuberculosis outbreaks, proving exactly how desperate the private sector is to hide their extraction methods from any form of public oversight. And when the community attempts to bridge that isolation, the state responds with militarized force. When family members, local organizers, and journalists gathered in solidarity with the hunger strikers outside Delaney Hall, the federal enforcement apparatus did not open a dialogue. Instead, they deployed state troopers in riot gear and mounted officers on horseback firing pepper balls and tear gas directly into a crowd of community supporters. Dozens were arrested, and a photojournalist covering the protest was hit and dragged by a car exiting the facility. This is the unmasked material reality of the containment state. They will deploy chemical weapons on domestic streets and run over journalists simply to protect the physical perimeter of a private corporate investment. The apparatus is completely terrified of the inside connecting with the outside. They require total, manufactured isolation to maintain their extraction pipeline. But the strikes are actively spreading. The corporate ledgers are bleeding, and the physical architecture of this containment system is beginning to crack under the unrelenting weight of human defiance. The machinery of containment presents itself as an immutable, eternal force, but it is ultimately fragile, built entirely on stolen wealth, manufactured crises, and bleeding ledgers that are fundamentally unsustainable against the inevitable tide of human solidarity. And as always, please remember open hearts, open minds.